Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into one of the most brutal workplaces of the Middle Ages. A place where the air is white with choking dust, the noise never stops, and your life expectancy drops faster than a sack of grain down a chute. We're talking about the medieval mill house, where you're about to discover that grinding flour wasn't just hard work. It was a relentless, dangerous, suffocating existence that most modern people couldn't endure for even a single shift. Picture this. It's perpetually loud, perpetually dusty, and you're perpetually exhausted. The massive millstones are turning, the wooden gears are groaning, and somewhere beneath all that mechanical thunder, you can hear the rush of water or the creak of a windmill's sails. This isn't a quaint pastoral scene from a storybook. This is an industrial accident waiting to happen, wrapped in feudal oppression, served with a side of community hatred. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing how far across the globe this sleepy community reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're waking up, but calling it waking is generous. You never really slept. The mill doesn't sleep, so neither do you. Somewhere around 4 in the morning, maybe earlier, maybe later, because accurate timekeeping isn't really a thing in your world. You don't own a clock. The church bells are your only guide, and even those are approximate at best. What you do know is that the sky outside your tiny window is still black, the stars are still visible, and your body is screaming at you to stay horizontal just a little longer. But you can't, because even in the darkness, even in these pre-dawn hours, you can hear it. The rhythmic thunder of the millstones grinding grain somewhere below your sleeping quarters. The sound reverberates through every timber in the building, through the straw-stuffed mattress beneath you, through your skull. It's been going all night because your assistant, usually your eldest son or an apprentice, has been tending the mill since midnight. Medieval mills, especially the profitable ones, run nearly around the clock during harvest season. Grain waits for no one, and neither does the Lord who owns your mill and expects his cut. You swing your legs out of bed, and your feet hit a floor that's gritty with flour dust. It's everywhere. It's in the cracks between the floorboards, it's on your blanket, it's probably in your lungs. You'll be coughing up white-flecked phlegm before breakfast. Everyone who works in a mill does. It's just part of the job, like the constant ringing in your ears or the way your hands never quite stop tingling from the vibration of the machinery. The room is cold, properly medieval cold, the kind that makes you understand why people died of chills back then. There's no central heating, obviously. No radiators humming to life. You've got a small brazier in the corner, but the charcoal is expensive, and you're not wealthy despite working one of the most important jobs in the village economy. Most of your income goes straight to the Lord as rent and fees. What's left barely keeps your family fed. So you shiver, you pull on the same woolen tunic you've worn for the past 3 days, and you try not to think about how much warmer it would be to just crawl back under that blanket. But here's the thing, if you stop working, if you sleep in, if you let the mill fall idle, you're not just losing income. You're violating the terms of your lease. See, you don't own this mill. Nobody in medieval England or France or Germany owns their mill unless they're nobility. You lease it from a lord, a baron, a bishop, an abbot, and that lease comes with ironclad obligations. You must grind all the grain brought to you. You must maintain the equipment. You must keep the mill operational every single day except Sundays and major holy days. And even then, there's often an exemption clause for harvest time. Failure to meet these terms means eviction, fines, or worse. So you stumble down the narrow wooden stairs, your hand trailing along the wall because it's too dark to see properly. You're navigating by memory and by sound. The grinding noise gets louder with every step, and now you can feel the vibration more intensely. The whole building shakes. Not violently, but constantly, like a low-grade earthquake that never ends. This vibration is slowly destroying the structural integrity of your home. Cracks form in the plaster. Joints loosen. In 20 years, this building will need major repairs. And guess who's responsible for those? Not the Lord. You. You reach the mill floor, and the scene that greets you is something out of an industrial nightmare, except it's pre-industrial, which somehow makes it worse. There's your son, 13 years old, standing next to the grain hopper, his face ghostly white with flour dust, his hair stiff with it. He's been awake since midnight, monitoring the feed, adjusting the gap between the stones, and clearing jams. He looks exhausted. He is exhausted. Child labor laws won't be invented for another 600 years. The millstones themselves are massive, anywhere from 4 to 6 feet in diameter, weighing upward of a ton each. The bottom stone, called the bed stone, sits stationary. The top stone, called the runner stone, spins above it, powered by the water wheel outside. Grain gets fed through a hole in the center of the runner stone, and as the stone spins, the grain is crushed between the two surfaces and pushed outward toward the edges, where it falls as flour into a collection trough. Simple in principle, absolutely brutal in practice. The noise is the first thing that assaults you, really assaults you now that you're on the mill floor. It's not just loud, it's physically painful. The stone-on-stone grinding produces a low, rumbling thunder that you feel in your chest cavity. On top of that, there's the clatter of the wooden gears that transfer power from the water wheel to the millstones, the rush of water outside, and the occasional sharp crack when a piece of grain hull pops under pressure. Historians still argue whether medieval millers suffered from significant hearing loss, but honestly, how could they not? You're standing in what amounts to a pre-modern factory, and there's no OSHA, no ear protection, no noise ordinances. Just you and the endless roar. Your son sees you and nods. No point trying to shout a greeting over the noise. You move to inspect the operation. The grain is flowing smoothly from the hopper, a wooden funnel suspended above the stones, and the flour emerging from the edges looks consistent in texture. Good. That means the stones are properly aligned. If they're too close together, the flour overheats and develops a burnt taste. Too far apart, and you get coarse meal instead of fine flour, and the customers will complain, and complaints get back to the Lord, and then you're in trouble. You reach out and let some of the fresh flour run through your fingers. It's warm, almost hot. The friction of the stones generates considerable heat, and in the summer, this room becomes an absolute oven. In the winter, it's one of the warmer places in the building, which sounds nice until you remember that you're still breathing in clouds of flour dust with every breath, and that warmth just makes you sweatier and more uncomfortable under your heavy wool clothing. Speaking of that flour dust, look up. No, really, imagine looking up right now. The entire ceiling is coated in a thick, white layer. It hangs in the air like fog. When a shaft of early morning light finally breaks through the small windows, you'll see it illuminated, thousands upon thousands of particles swirling in the air currents created by the machinery. You're breathing this. Your son is breathing this. Everyone who works here is breathing this every day, for years on end. Medieval medical texts don't have a specific term for the lung disease that plagues millers, but they definitely noticed that millers coughed a lot, developed breathing problems, and often died younger than farmers. Modern doctors would recognize the symptoms immediately: pneumoconiosis, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, occupational asthma. Your lungs are slowly being coated with a layer of flour dust that will never fully clear. Each breath deposits more. By the time you're 50, if you make it to 50, you'll be wheezing like a broken bellows. But right now, at dawn, you don't think about that. You think about the fact that old widow Marjorie is supposed to bring 3 sacks of rye this morning, and the baker's boy will be here by 6 with the weekly wheat order, and the reeve, the Lord's enforcement officer, is due for an inspection sometime this week, and you still haven't fixed that crack in the grain chute. Your to-do list is already overwhelming, and the sun isn't even up yet. You check the water wheel through a small door that opens to the outside. The wheel is turning steadily, each bucket scooping water from the mill race, the artificial channel that diverts water from the river to power your mill. The sound of splashing water is almost soothing compared to the grinding stones. But don't be fooled. That wheel is dangerous. It's a massive wooden structure, maybe 15 to 20 feet in diameter, studded with buckets or paddles, and it's turning with enough force to power a ton of spinning stone. If you slip and fall into the race, if your clothing gets caught in the mechanism, you're done. People die this way regularly. There are medieval coroners' reports documenting millers crushed by their own water wheels, children drowned in mill races, workers mangled by exposed gears. And that's just the start of your day. You haven't eaten yet. You haven't dealt with a single customer yet. You haven't faced the social dynamics that make you one of the most despised people in the village. You're just standing here in the pre-dawn darkness, covered in flour dust, your ears ringing, your lungs aching, watching a primitive machine do its endless work. The medieval mill runs on water, wind, or sometimes animal power, but it really runs on you. Your constant attention, your maintenance, your willingness to sacrifice sleep and health and social standing. And here's the joke. You're essential to the entire feudal economy. Without mills, there's no efficient way to turn grain into flour. Without flour, there's no bread. Without bread, medieval society collapses. You are, quite literally, keeping civilization fed. But does anyone thank you? Does the Lord reduce your rent? Do the villagers treat you with respect? Not even close. But we'll get to that later. For now, the sun is starting to rise, painting the dusty air with shafts of golden light, and you've got another 16-hour shift ahead of you. Welcome to the mill. Try not to get crushed, poisoned, or driven insane by the noise. You're going to love it here. You take your first deep breath of the morning, and immediately you're coughing. Not a polite, clear-your-throat cough. A deep, rattling hack that brings up something unpleasant from your chest. You spit into the corner, and even in the dim light, you can see the white flecks in it. Flour. Always flour. It's in your lungs, in your throat, coating the inside of your nose. You've been working in this mill for 15 years, and you honestly can't remember what it feels like to take a clean breath anymore. This is the part that would absolutely destroy a modern person within hours. We're used to air quality standards, HEPA filters, and workplace safety regulations that limit particulate exposure. You're standing in what amounts to an unventilated cloud chamber of organic dust, and you're going to spend 12 to 16 hours a day in this environment 6 days a week for the rest of your life, which, spoiler alert, won't be as long as it should be. The flour dust hanging in the air isn't just annoying. It's legitimately dangerous in ways that medieval people understood intuitively but couldn't quite explain scientifically. They knew millers got sick. They knew millers coughed. They knew that working in a mill for decades left you wheezing and weak. What they didn't know was that the particulate matter was small enough to penetrate deep into the alveoli of your lungs, where it would trigger chronic inflammation, scarring, and progressive respiratory failure. Modern occupational health specialists have studied historical mills, the ones that still operate as museums, and measured the air quality inside. The results are staggering. During active grinding, airborne flour dust can reach concentrations of 50 to 150 milligrams per cubic meter. For context, OSHA's current permissible exposure limit for total dust in the workplace is 15 milligrams per cubic meter averaged over an 8-hour shift. You're being exposed to levels 10 times higher than modern safety standards allow, and you're doing it for twice as long as a standard workday with zero protective equipment. But wait, it gets worse. Because it's not just flour dust. Mixed in with those innocent-sounding wheat and rye particles are other things. Mold spores from grain that wasn't properly dried before storage, fragments of insect exoskeletons from the weevils that infest every grain shipment, bits of mouse droppings from the rodents that live in the walls, and occasionally particles of the millstone itself, tiny fragments of granite or limestone that have abraded off during the grinding process. You're inhaling a cocktail of biological and mineral hazards that would make a modern industrial hygienist faint. Your son is sweeping the floor around the millstones, trying to keep the flour from piling up too deep. It's a losing battle. For every cup he sweeps into the collection bin, 2 more cups drift down from the air. The stuff accumulates everywhere, on the windowsills, in the corners, on top of the wooden beams overhead. If you ran your finger along any surface in this building, it would come away white and dusty, even if someone just cleaned an hour ago. Here's something that would absolutely horrify you if you knew about it. Flour dust is explosive. Extremely explosive. Under the right conditions, when it's suspended in the air at a certain concentration and meets an ignition source, it can detonate with devastating force. Modern industrial history is full of catastrophic grain elevator and mill explosions that killed hundreds of workers. The phenomenon is called a dust explosion, and it happens because each tiny flour particle has a large surface area relative to its mass, making it incredibly flammable. When thousands of particles ignite simultaneously in a confined space, the pressure wave is enormous. Medieval mills didn't have electric sparks or gas flames, but they had plenty of other ignition sources. The friction sparks from millstones grinding a piece of metal that got mixed in with the grain, the open flames of candles and oil lamps used for lighting, the embers in the heating brazier. And yet, curiously, you don't hear about medieval mills exploding all the time. Historians still argue whether this is because the conditions weren't quite right. Maybe the dust concentration was usually too low, or the buildings were drafty enough to prevent accumulation, or whether these incidents were simply recorded as generic fires rather than explosions because people didn't understand the mechanism. Either way, you're working in what amounts to a bomb. A slow-acting bomb that's definitely destroying your lungs, and potentially a fast-acting bomb that could level the building in seconds. Sweet dreams, right? You walk over to inspect the grain that's waiting to be milled. There are several sacks piled near the hopper, each one tied with rope and marked with a crude symbol to indicate who owns it. That one belongs to the baker, that one to Widow Marjorie, that one to the monastery 3 miles away. You untie the first sack and peer inside, running your hand through the wheat kernels. They're relatively clean, which is good. Sometimes people bring you grain that's mixed with stones, sticks, bits of chaff, even dead mice. Everything goes into the millstones, and while the stones can handle most contaminants, they weren't designed to grind rocks, and every stone-on-stone collision damages the grinding surface a little bit more. You scoop up a handful of wheat and examine it more closely. This is where your expertise as a miller actually matters. You're looking for signs of moisture. Wet grain clogs the stones and produces gummy flour. You're looking for signs of sprouting. Germinated grain has already converted its starches to sugars and won't make good flour. And you're looking for discoloration because discolored grain might be contaminated with ergot, and ergot is... well, we'll get to ergot later. Let's just say it's bad news. The wheat looks acceptable, so you hoist the sack. It weighs about 100 pounds, and carry it over to the hopper. Your back protests. You've been hauling 100-pound sacks since you were a teenager, and now in your mid-30s you've got chronic lower back pain that never really goes away. There's no physical therapy, no muscle relaxants, no ergonomic equipment. You just deal with it. On particularly bad days, you drink extra ale because alcohol is literally the only pain management option available to you. You pour the wheat into the hopper, and the millstones immediately begin their work. The grain disappears into the eye of the runner stone, the hole in the center, and moments later, fresh flour begins cascading from the edges. The transformation is almost magical. Hard, golden kernels go in, soft, white powder comes out. This is the alchemy that keeps your society fed, the technology that separates civilization from subsistence. But the moment that flour starts flowing, the air quality in the room drops noticeably. A fresh cloud of dust blooms upward from the stones, and you feel it hit the back of your throat. You cough again, reflexively. Your son is coughing too. This is just normal. This is background noise, background coughing, that accompanies every moment of mill operation. Medieval physicians, working with their limited understanding of anatomy and disease, tried to explain why millers suffered from respiratory problems. Some thought it was an imbalance of humors, too much phlegm accumulating in the lungs. Others believed it was a form of consumption, that mysterious wasting disease that seemed to affect all kinds of workers. A few, the more observant ones, made the connection between the dusty environment and the symptoms, but they had no way to prevent the exposure. There were no respirator masks, no ventilation systems, no safety equipment of any kind. You worked in the dust or you didn't work at all. Here's a fun quirk from the historical record. Some medieval medical texts recommend that millers drink plenty of wine or strong ale to cleanse the lungs of dust. This doesn't actually work. Alcohol doesn't clear particulate matter from your respiratory system, but it probably made people feel better, and it might have had a mild anti-inflammatory effect. So congratulations, your occupational hazard comes with doctor-approved day drinking. The sun is fully up now, and the light streaming through the small windows illuminates the full extent of the dust problem. The air looks like snow is falling indoors. Every beam of sunlight is solid with particles. You can literally see the air moving, swirling currents created by the motion of the millstones and the draft from the water wheel. It's weirdly beautiful in a way, this slow-motion blizzard of flour. It's also slowly killing you. Your son finishes sweeping and comes over to check the flour quality. He's learning the trade as you learned it from your father, as he learned it from his father. This is a family business passed down through generations, along with the chronic cough and the shortened lifespan. He scoops up a handful of flour and rubs it between his fingers, testing the texture. Too coarse and people complain. Too fine, and you're wasting time and energy grinding more than necessary. The goal is to hit that sweet spot of texture that satisfies customers without overworking the stones. "It's good," he shouts over the noise, and you nod. The kid's got a good feel for it. He'll make a fine miller someday, assuming his lungs hold out. You move on to your next task, monitoring the millstone gap. This is crucial. The two stones need to be close enough to grind the grain effectively, but not so close that they actually touch. If the runner stone drops down and makes direct contact with the bed stone, you get stone-on-stone grinding, which is loud, produces sparks, and rapidly wears down both surfaces. Millstones are expensive. A good pair might cost as much as a year's income, and your lease probably makes you responsible for replacing them when they wear out. So you're constantly adjusting, constantly checking, constantly worried about whether you're grinding too close or too far apart. The adjustment mechanism is primitive, a wooden screw or lever system that raises and lowers the runner stone by tiny increments. You crouch down next to the stones, careful not to get too close because there's no safety guard, nothing to prevent your hand from being drawn into the gap if you slip, and you listen. Yes, listen. Experienced millers can hear when the gap is right. There's a particular quality to the grinding sound when the stones are properly spaced. Too close, and there's a harsh, rasping overtone. Too far, and the sound becomes hollow, echoey. You listen. You adjust. You listen again. It's an art more than a science, this calibration of gap width, and it's something you can't really explain to someone else. They have to develop the ear for it, the feel for it, through years of experience and constant exposure to the sound, which, again, is destroying your hearing, but that's just another occupational hazard on the pile. Around you, the flour continues its relentless accumulation. It settles on your clothes, in your hair, on your eyelashes. When you blink, you can feel the grit of it. When you lick your lips, you taste it, that chalky, slightly sweet flavor of raw wheat flour. It's in your mouth, in your nose, in your lungs. You are becoming a creature of flour, slowly transforming into a dust-covered ghost of your former self. And this is just hour 2 of your workday. You've got 14 more hours of this ahead of you, breathing this, choking on this, watching the dust settle and rise and settle again in an endless cycle. But here's the really bleak part. You don't have a choice. This is your livelihood. This is how you feed your family. The mill lease is valuable. Mills are monopolies in the medieval economy, which we'll discuss in detail later. And you're actually one of the more financially secure people in the village, despite the health hazards. Peasant farmers have their own problems. Crop failures, famine, heavy taxes. At least you have a relatively steady income stream. At least you're not starving. At least not yet. Though with lungs that are slowly filling with flour dust, starvation might not be what kills you. Respiratory failure will probably get there first. You stand up, brush ineffectively at the flour coating your tunic, and prepare for the next sack of grain. The millstones grind on. The dust continues to fall. And you keep breathing, keep coughing, keep working, because what else are you going to do? This is your life now. This is the air you breathe. Get used to it, or rather, try not to think about it too much as you drift off to sleep tonight, knowing that tomorrow you'll wake up and do it all over again, one breath of contaminated air at a time. You step outside for a moment, not for a break, because breaks aren't really a thing when you're running a mill, but to check on the component that literally controls your entire existence, the water wheel. And the moment you see it, turning with that steady, inexorable rhythm, you're reminded of an uncomfortable truth. You don't control your schedule. You don't control your workload. That wheel controls you. The water wheel is massive, maybe 18 feet in diameter, constructed from heavy oak timbers that have been shaped, fitted, and pegged together by a master carpenter who charged your lord an absolute fortune for the work. It's an impressive piece of engineering. Really, dozens of buckets or paddles arranged around the rim, each one positioned to catch the flowing water from the mill race and convert that liquid energy into rotational force. It's beautiful in a purely mechanical sense. It's also a tyrant. See, the wheel doesn't care if you're tired. It doesn't care if you're sick. It doesn't care if it's 3 in the morning or high noon or the middle of a thunderstorm. As long as water flows in the race, the wheel turns. And as long as the wheel turns, the millstones grind. And as long as the millstones grind, you need to be there, monitoring, adjusting, troubleshooting, because an unattended mill is a disaster waiting to happen. Let's talk about what happens when things go wrong, because that's where the real nightmare begins. The water wheel is connected to the millstones through a series of wooden gears, massive toothed wheels that transfer power from the horizontal shaft of the water wheel to the vertical shaft that drives the runner stone. These gears are under enormous stress, and they're made of wood, which means they wear down, crack, split, and occasionally explode into splinters without warning. You've seen it happen. 3 years ago, a gear tooth broke during operation, and the sudden loss of load caused the water wheel to speed up dramatically. The millstones, suddenly spinning much faster than intended, overheated and cracked. The repair cost you 6 months' income. Your family ate nothing but pottage and stale bread for half a year because you had to pay for a new millstone. And here's the thing, you can't just stop the wheel when you notice a problem. There's no brake, no clutch, no emergency cutoff. If you need to stop the mill, you have to physically intervene in the water flow. You either close the sluice gate that controls water entering the race, which requires walking out to the gate mechanism, often through mud and water, and cranking a heavy wooden wheel, or you open a bypass channel that diverts water away from the wheel. Both operations take time. If something's going catastrophically wrong inside the mill, you might not have that time. Medieval coroners' records, and yes, they kept records of accidental deaths, document numerous cases of millers killed by their own equipment, crushed between gears, caught in drive belts, struck by flying debris when a component failed, drowned in mill races. The water wheel, for all its utility, is an unforgiving piece of machinery. It has the power to do useful work, and it has the power to pulverize human bodies without slowing down. You walk along the race, checking for debris, branches, leaves, dead animals. Anything that blocks the water flow reduces the wheel's power and efficiency. You spot a tangle of branches wedged against the intake grate and climb down to clear it. The water is cold, probably just above freezing, and it soaks into your boots immediately. Your feet are going to be numb for hours. You yank at the branches, fighting the pressure of the current, and finally pull them free. The water flow increases instantly, and you can hear the wheel's tempo pick up slightly. More water, more power, more grinding capacity. The mill is pleased. You are wet, cold, and miserable. This is the reality of water-powered mills. You're at the mercy of the river. Too little water during droughts or in late summer when rivers run low, and the wheel barely turns. You can't grind enough grain to meet demand, customers complain, and your income drops. Too much water during spring floods or heavy storms, and you're facing a different set of problems. The race can overflow, flooding the mill building. The wheel can spin dangerously fast, putting excessive stress on the gears. In extreme cases, the entire mill can be washed away. It happened to your neighbor, old Thomas the Miller, 2 villages over. Spring flood came, undermined the foundation, and the whole structure collapsed into the river. Thomas survived, but his livelihood didn't. Last you heard, he was working as a day laborer hauling rocks for a road crew. So you're constantly monitoring the water level, constantly adjusting the sluice gate, constantly worried about what the weather is going to do to your operations. Medieval people didn't have weather forecasts. You had folk wisdom, red sky at night, sailor's delight, and your own observations of clouds and wind direction, and that was it. If a storm was coming, you often didn't know until it was already raining. Back inside the mill, the grinding continues. The rhythm is hypnotic. The splash of water on the wheel, the rumble of gears, the thunder of stone on stone. It's been going for hours now, and it will continue for hours more. The wheel doesn't get tired. The wheel doesn't need to eat or sleep. The wheel just turns and turns and turns. And here's where the psychological weight of this job really starts to press down on you. You can never fully relax. Even when you're lying in bed upstairs, supposedly sleeping, you're listening to the mill. You're unconsciously monitoring the sound, waiting for any change in pitch or rhythm that might indicate a problem. A gear slipping, a stone touching, a bearing starting to fail. Your brain never truly shuts off because the consequences of missing a warning sign are too severe. Historians still argue whether medieval millers suffered from what we'd now recognize as anxiety disorders or chronic stress. The historical record doesn't give us detailed psychological profiles, obviously, but we do have accounts of millers being described as twitchy, nervous, quick to anger. We have records of millers drinking heavily, more than the average peasant, and medieval peasants drank a lot because the water was often unsafe. And we have indirect evidence in the form of accident reports and maintenance records that suggest millers were constantly dealing with equipment failures and emergencies. You're basically on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with the exception of Sundays and major feast days. And even then, if something goes wrong, if a bearing seizes or a flood threatens, you're working religious prohibition be damned. Let's talk about what happens when you need to perform maintenance on the wheel itself, because this is where things get properly dangerous. To access the wheel's mechanism, you often have to climb onto a narrow platform or walkway suspended over the race. The water is rushing past beneath you. The wheel is turning inches from your face, and you're trying to replace a worn bearing or tighten a loose timber or clear a jam while maintaining your balance and not getting pulled into the machinery. There's a particularly nasty maintenance task called dressing the stones. which involves stopping the mill, climbing down into the stone housing, and recutting the furrows in the millstone faces. These furrows, radiating lines carved into the stone surface, are essential for the grinding process. They channel the grain outward from the eye to the edge while the stone face pulverizes it. But they wear down over time and need to be recut regularly, maybe once a month depending on how much milling you're doing. To dress the stones, you need to lift the runner stone, all 1 ton of it, using a wooden crane mechanism built into the mill. Then you climb down into the narrow space where the stones sit, and you use a hammer and chisel to carefully recut each furrow. This process takes hours. It's physically demanding, it requires precision, and if the crane fails while you're down there, you're trapped beneath a ton of stone. Did I mention there are no safety cables? No backup systems? Just wooden beams and rope and hope. One of the quirks documented in medieval mill records is the tradition of teaching apprentices to dress stones by having them work on old, discarded stones before they're allowed near the active mill. This suggests that people understood the skill required and the danger involved in this maintenance task. But once you're the master miller, once it's your mill and your responsibility, you're the one crouching in that stone pit, breathing stone dust instead of flour dust for variety, hoping the crane holds. The water wheel keeps turning outside, even when the stones are lifted and inactive. It's still connected to the gear train, still moving, still representing hundreds of pounds of rotational energy. You can hear it through the walls. That steady splash, splash, splash of buckets hitting water. It's a countdown timer, in a way. The longer the mill sits idle for maintenance, the more income you're losing. Grain is piling up, customers are waiting, and the wheel is mocking you with every revolution. Some mills, the more sophisticated ones, have mechanisms to disengage the stone shaft from the water wheel, allowing the wheel to turn freely while the stones remain stopped. These are expensive additions, typically found only in mills owned by wealthy monasteries or powerful lords. Your mill doesn't have one. Your mill is basic, functional, and cheap, which means every time you need to perform maintenance on the stones, you have to shut down the entire operation by closing the sluice gate and stopping the wheel. And closing that sluice gate is its own adventure. The gate is heavy, a thick wooden barrier that slides down into the water channel to block the flow. It's operated by a windlass, a crank mechanism that requires serious upper body strength to turn. On a good day, when the mechanism is well maintained and the gate slides freely, it takes you 5 minutes of hard cranking to close it completely. On a bad day, when the gate has swollen from water exposure or debris has jammed the track, you're out there for 20 minutes, straining against the crank, your back screaming, your hands developing fresh blisters on top of old calluses. And then, once maintenance is complete, you have to open the gate again, and the wheel lurches back to life, and you're racing back into the mill to make sure everything engages properly, that the stones don't slam together, that the gears mesh correctly. It's a whole production every single time. The wheel is your partner in this enterprise, but it's an unequal partnership. The wheel has all the power, literal power, and you're just the human trying to harness it, direct it, and not get destroyed by it in the process. You stand there, watching it turn, water droplets flying from the buckets in glittering arcs, and you think about the fact that this wheel will outlast you. It'll be turning long after you're dead, after your son is dead, after your grandson is dead. The mill itself might stand for centuries. There are mills in England and France with foundations dating back to the 11th century, rebuilt and modified countless times, but still occupying the same spot on the same stream. You're temporary, replaceable. The wheel doesn't care about your chronic back pain, your flour-damaged lungs, your sleep deprivation. It just turns endlessly, doing the work it was designed to do. And you have no choice but to turn with it, matching its rhythm, subordinating your life to its demands, because this wheel, this beautiful, terrifying, inexorable wheel, is your livelihood, your identity, and your master. Better get back inside. Those millstones won't monitor themselves, and the wheel, as always, is waiting for you to fall behind. You hear footsteps approaching the mill, and your stomach tightens. Customers, the people who need your services and absolutely resent you for it. Welcome to the most socially awkward aspect of your job. You're essentially a feudal tax collector, except instead of collecting money, you're collecting grain, and instead of being appointed by the crown, you're enforcing the Lord's monopoly on milling. And trust me, nobody likes you for it. Here comes Walter the farmer, dragging 2 heavy sacks of wheat. He's scowling before he even enters the building. You know what's coming. You've had this conversation 100 times. "Morning, Walter." You shout over the noise of the millstones. He grunts, doesn't make eye contact, just hefts his sacks onto the receiving area and stands there with his arms crossed, radiating hostility. "I'll get to these within the hour," you tell him. "You can wait or come back this afternoon." "I'll wait," he says. "Need to make sure I get my full measure back." And there it is. The accusation that doesn't need to be spoken aloud. He thinks you're going to cheat him. They all think you're going to cheat them. It doesn't matter that you've been milling his grain for 10 years and have never stolen so much as a handful. The suspicion is baked into the relationship, as much a part of the process as the grinding itself. Let's talk about why everyone hates you, because it's actually a fascinating window into medieval economics and feudal power structures. You operate what's called a soak mill, a monopoly mill that serves a specific area. The lord of the manor, the guy who owns the land, the village, and basically everything in it including the mill, has decreed that all his tenants must bring their grain to your mill. They're not allowed to grind it themselves using hand mills or querns, those small stone devices people used for thousands of years before water mills became common. They're not allowed to take their grain to a mill in the next village. They must use your mill and they must pay your fee. This arrangement is called mill soak, and it's enforced with terrifying efficiency. If someone is caught using a hand quern, even in their own home, grinding grain they grew themselves, they can be fined, have the corn confiscated and destroyed, or in extreme cases, face imprisonment. There are actual legal records of lords conducting raids on peasant homes, searching for illegal hand mills. Finding one was like finding a counterfeiting operation. It represented a direct challenge to the lord's economic authority. Why such harsh enforcement? Because the mill is a money-making machine for the lord. He collects rent from you for the privilege of operating it, plus he often demands a portion of the milling fees. Every sack of grain that gets ground in your mill generates income that flows upward through the feudal system. If people are grinding their own grain at home, that income disappears. So the monopoly must be absolute. And you're the face of that monopoly. You're the person physically taking their grain, milling it, and handing back slightly less than they brought, because you're keeping a portion as your fee. The standard rate is about 1/16 of the grain, though it varies by region and by the specific terms of your lease. So if Walter brings you 16 pounds of wheat, he's going home with 15 pounds of flour, and you're keeping 1 pound as payment. From your perspective, this is entirely reasonable. You're providing a valuable service. You maintain expensive equipment. You work brutal hours. You're running a business. From Walter's perspective, you're a thief with a monopoly, taking his grain by force of law, and he has no recourse. "How much are you taking this time?" Walter asks, his voice dripping with suspicion. "The usual, 1/16, same as always." He snorts. "Highway robbery is what it is. My grandfather could grind his own grain. Didn't need to pay some miller to do it for him. And there's the generational resentment. Walter's grandfather did indeed grind his own grain using a hand quern. But that was before the Lord built this mill and established the soak. Now, possessing a hand quern is illegal. The Lord's bailiff conducts periodic inspections, and any querns discovered are confiscated and often destroyed in public, sometimes broken up and incorporated into the church floor as a warning. Historians still argue whether this practice, using confiscated cornerstones in church construction, was purely practical, free building material, or deliberately symbolic, your tools of resistance are now part of the structure that demands your obedience. You don't make the rules, you just enforce them. But try explaining that to Walter. Take it up with the Lord, you say, which is what you always say, and which never helps. The Lord, Walter spits. And you're his man, aren't you? Taking your cut. The irony is that you're not particularly well off. Yes, you're better off than landless laborers, and your income is more stable than Walter's. You don't face crop failures the way farmers do. But after you pay rent to the Lord, after you cover maintenance costs on the mill equipment, after you buy food for your family because you're not growing crops, you're not exactly living in luxury. You're comfortable. That's it. Comfortable enough to make the peasants resent you, not wealthy enough to afford the things the actual rich people have. But perception matters more than reality, and the perception is that you're part of the system that extracts wealth from the people at the bottom. You're the visible enforcement mechanism of feudal economic control. And nobody wants to be friends with the tax collector. Walter finally leaves, taking his flour and his resentment with him. You add his payment grain to your store. That 1 pound of wheat will eventually be ground, mixed in with other payment grain and sold or used to feed your own family. It's not much, but multiply it by every customer, every day, and it adds up to a livelihood. Next through the door is the baker, young Thomas, who at least has the decency to be civil. He needs regular, large-quantity milling for his business, so he can't afford to antagonize you. You have a functional working relationship, which is about as close to friendship as you're going to get in this job. Busy morning? He asks, glancing at the pile of sacks waiting to be processed. Always busy. Harvest season. He nods. I'll need 20 pounds of fine wheat flour by tomorrow. Can you manage it? I can manage it. It'll cost you. It always costs me, he says with a wry smile. But I'll pay your rate. Just make sure it's properly ground. Last batch had some coarse bits. You take the criticism in stride. Stone gap must have been a bit wide. You'll adjust. This is the delicate balance of your job. Delivering consistent quality while working with equipment that's constantly wearing down and changing. The millstones don't stay perfectly shaped. They develop grooves and pits. The gap varies slightly as the wooden bearings wear. You're constantly compensating, constantly adjusting, trying to maintain a consistent product with inconsistent tools. Thomas leaves, and you're alone again with the noise and the dust and the grinding. But not for long. Never for long. Because here comes the person you really don't want to see. The Reeve, the Lord's administrative officer, the man who collects the Lord's taxes and enforces the Lord's rules and generally makes your life complicated. He's a weaselly little man named Osbert, and he carries a wooden tally stick, a notched piece of wood used for record keeping, and an attitude of superiority that makes you want to push him into the mill race. Inspection, he announces, not bothering with pleasantries. You nod. Step aside. Let him poke around. He checks the grain stores, comparing the quantity to his records. He examines the millstones, looking for evidence that they're improperly maintained. He even climbs up to the living quarters upstairs, nosing through your personal space under the guise of checking that you're not illegally subletting part of the mill building. This is another delightful aspect of your lease. Surprise inspections. The Lord, through his Reeve, has the right to enter the mill at any time to verify that you're meeting your obligations. Making repairs promptly, grinding all grain brought to you, not hoarding grain, not adulterating flour, not running a side business, not damaging the Lord's property. The list of potential violations is extensive. Osbert emerges from upstairs, looking vaguely disappointed that he didn't find anything incriminating. The water wheel needs oiling, he says. It's squeaking. It's on my list. You reply, knowing that it's actually fine, that Osbert knows nothing about mill maintenance, and that he's just asserting his authority by finding something to criticize. See that it's done. The Lord expects his property to be maintained in good order. Of course. He makes a note on his tally stick, probably recording that he conducted an inspection and found you marginally competent. Then he leaves and you breathe easier. These inspections always feel like traps waiting to spring. One mistake, one violation, and you could face fines or even eviction. The feudal system runs on relationships of mutual obligation and suspicion. The Lord suspects you might cheat him, so he sends the reeve. The peasants suspect you're cheating them, so they watch you like hawks. You suspect everyone is looking for a reason to criticize you, so you're constantly defensive and paranoid. It's exhausting. And here's a fun historical detail. In some regions, millers had legal restrictions on their movements. They couldn't leave the mill area without permission from the Lord because the mill needed to be operational at all times. You were essentially tied to your workplace, bound by economic necessity and legal obligation. Freedom? What's that? You've got millstones to monitor. By midday, you've processed grain for a dozen customers, each interaction ranging from coolly transactional to openly hostile. Your face hurts from maintaining a neutral expression. Your jaw aches from clenching your teeth every time someone makes a snide comment about your fees. Your reputation as a grasping, dishonest operator precedes you, even though you're actually trying to run an honest operation. Some millers did cheat, of course. The historical record documents plenty of cases. Millers who kept more than their fair share, who mixed low-quality flour into good flour, who used rigged measuring containers. These cases make for entertaining reading in medieval court records. John the Miller was fined 3 shillings for keeping excessive toll. But they also reinforced the stereotype that all millers were thieves. You're paying the price for the sins of your profession. Every dishonest miller who came before you has made your job harder. Every customer who was cheated by someone else comes to you with suspicion already loaded. And the social isolation this creates is profound. You're not invited to village gatherings. People don't ask your opinion at manor court meetings. Children are warned to stay away from the mill, partly for safety reasons, but partly because their parents don't trust you. You exist in a weird social limbo, essential but despised, necessary but unwelcome. Your only real relationships are with other millers, people who understand the job, the stress, the social stigma. When you occasionally encounter a miller from a neighboring village at market, you actually talk. Compare notes on equipment maintenance, commiserate about difficult customers, share dark humor about your mutual reputations. These brief connections are the closest thing you have to friendship. Walter comes back in the afternoon to collect his flour. He inspects it carefully, as if he'll be able to tell by looking whether you've stolen some. Then he measures it using a small wooden cup to verify you've given him the correct amount. Satisfied? You ask, unable to keep the edge out of your voice. For now, he says, and leaves without another word. This is your life. This is every day. Necessary, profitable, soul-crushing work, performed in isolation, sustained by a monopoly that makes you wealthy enough to survive and hated enough to suffer. The millstones keep grinding. The water wheel keeps turning. And you keep taking people's grain and giving back slightly less, enforcing the Lord's economic power 1/16 of a pound at a time, wondering if anyone will even come to your funeral when you finally die of the dust or the stress or the sheer accumulated weight of being necessary and despised in equal measure. Sweet dreams, right? The sun is setting, which means it's time for the part of your day that should be relaxing but somehow isn't: going home. Except here's the thing, you're already home. You live in the mill. Your bedroom is directly above the grinding floor. Your kitchen shares a wall with the grain storage. And your children play in a courtyard that's 20 feet from machinery that could kill them in seconds. Work-life balance? That's a concept that won't be invented for about 700 years. Let's take a tour of your living quarters, because this is where the reality of medieval mill life really becomes claustrophobic. You climb the narrow wooden stairs, the same stairs you descended this morning in the pre-dawn darkness, and emerge into what generously could be called your family's living space. It's 3 rooms total. 3 rooms for you, your wife, your 4 children, and occasionally your elderly mother when she's too sick to manage her own cottage in the village. The first room is the main living area, which doubles as the kitchen, the dining room, the workroom, and during winter, the bedroom for your 2 youngest children because it's the only space with a fireplace. The fireplace itself is a simple affair, a stone hearth with a chimney that draws smoke up and out, theoretically. In practice, the room is often hazy with smoke because medieval chimneys aren't exactly engineered for efficiency. Your eyes water constantly when the fire's going, and everything you own, clothing, blankets, wooden furniture, is permanently infused with the smell of wood smoke. The room is maybe 12 feet by 12 feet. The floor is packed earth covered with rushes that need to be replaced weekly because they get matted down and disgusting. Your wife handles that job along with approximately 1,000 other domestic tasks, because medieval gender roles are rigid and unforgiving. The furniture consists of a rough wooden table, a few stools, some storage chests, and hooks on the wall for hanging clothing and tools. That's it. No decorations, no paintings, no personal touches. Functional, cramped, and depressing. The second room is where you and your wife sleep, along with your oldest daughter who's 11 and still hasn't married off yet. You're working on finding her a husband, probably another miller's son, because that's how these things work. Keep the trades in the families. This room is even smaller, maybe 8 feet by 10 feet, and it contains a bed, a wooden frame with rope webbing and a straw-stuffed mattress, and absolutely nothing else because there's no space for anything else. The bed is not comfortable. The straw pokes through the fabric. The ropes sag in the middle. You share this space with your wife and daughter, which means privacy is a foreign concept. Everything happens in close quarters. Sleeping, dressing, the occasional marital intimacy that you have to conduct in near silence so you don't wake your daughter 3 feet away. Medieval people were accustomed to this lack of privacy. Peasant families often slept 5 or 6 to a bed, but that doesn't make it pleasant. The third room is for your 2 older sons, ages 13 and 15, the ones who work in the mill alongside you. Their room is the smallest of all, basically a closet with a single narrow bed they share. When your mother stays with you, she sleeps in here too, and the boys move to the main room. It's musical beds, medieval style, and everyone's always slightly inconvenienced. Now, here's what makes this living situation particularly brutal. The noise. Remember that grinding sound we've been talking about? The thunder of millstones, the rumble of gears, the splash of the water wheel? That doesn't stop at night. If there's grain to be milled, if a customer has paid extra for overnight service, if your apprentice is downstairs tending the stones, the noise continues. You're trying to sleep while the entire building vibrates. You've become somewhat accustomed to it. Your brain has learned to filter out the constant rumble as background noise, but you never truly rest. The sleep you get is shallow, interrupted, not particularly restorative. And if anything changes in the sound, if the rhythm shifts, if there's a new squeak or clatter, you wake instantly, every nerve alert, because that might indicate a problem that needs immediate attention. Your wife has it even worse. She's not only dealing with the mill noise, but also with the children, who don't sleep well either. Your youngest, a boy of 4, cries frequently in the night. The baby, yes, there's a baby, 8 months old, wakes every few hours to nurse. Medieval infant mortality is staggering. Roughly 1 in 3 children don't survive to age 5. So every cough, every fever, every moment the baby seems listless sends your wife into quiet panic. She's standing at the table now, preparing the evening meal. Pottage as usual. It's always pottage. A thick stew made from whatever vegetables are available. Onions, cabbage, turnips if you're lucky, plus some barley or oats. Maybe a tiny bit of salted pork if you've had a good week. The pot hangs over the fire, and she stirs it mechanically, her face drawn with exhaustion. You try to remember the last time you saw her smile. Really smile, not the tight, polite expression she uses when customers are around. It's been months, maybe longer. She's 31 years old. She's been pregnant 7 times. 3 children died in infancy. And she looks 50. Medieval life is aging her at an accelerated rate, grinding her down as efficiently as the millstones grind grain. How is today? You ask, which is a stupid question because you know how today was. The same as yesterday. The same as tomorrow will be. Fine, she says, not looking up from the pot. The baby has a cough. Your stomach drops. A cough in an 8-month-old. This could be nothing. This could be the beginning of the end. There's no way to know, no doctor to consult, or rather, there's a doctor in the market town 10 miles away, but his services cost more than you make in a month, and he probably can't do anything anyway except prescribe herbs and prayers. Bad? You ask. Not yet, but I'm watching. What else can she do? You're all just watching all the time, monitoring your children for signs of the diseases that kill medieval children with terrifying regularity. Measles, smallpox, dysentery, pneumonia, whooping cough, scarlet fever. The list is endless. No vaccines, no antibiotics, no pediatric care. Just watching and hoping and sometimes praying, if you're the religious sort. Your oldest son clomps up the stairs, his face pale with flour dust, his hands and arms covered in it. He's been downstairs monitoring the stones while you took this brief break. He's 15, and he already has the chronic cough that marks all millers. When he's your age, his lungs will be as damaged as yours. You're condemning your own children to this life, this slow suffocation, because what choice do you have? This is the family trade. This is the mill lease that will pass to him someday. This is his inheritance. Stones are running smooth, he reports. The baker's order is nearly done. You nod. Good. I'll take over after we eat. He sits at the table, and your wife ladles pottage into wooden bowls. The family gathers, you, your wife, for children. The baby fusses in a wooden cradle near the fire. Your mother isn't here tonight. She's at her own cottage, which is a relief because that's one less mouth to feed. One less person competing for space in these cramped rooms. You say a perfunctory prayer, required even if you're not particularly devout, and then everyone eats in silence. The pottage is bland. It's always bland. Spices are expensive, available only to the wealthy. Salt is the only seasoning you can afford in quantity, and even that's rationed carefully. Medieval cuisine for common people is monotonous. Grain-based dishes, vegetables, occasional meat, all prepared with minimal seasoning. You eat to survive, not for pleasure. Your daughter asks if she can have more bread, and you shake your head. Bread is made from the flour you keep as payment from customers, and you have to manage that supply carefully. Too generous with yourselves, and you'll run short before the next batch of payment grain comes in. She accepts the refusal without argument. She's used to hearing no. After the meal, your wife clears the bowls and begins the evening routine. Getting the younger children ready for bed, nursing the baby, tending to the fire. You should help. You know you should help, but you're exhausted, and you still have several hours of mill work ahead of you, so you just sit there, staring at nothing, gathering what little energy you have left. The living space feels oppressive. The low ceiling, the smoke-stained walls, the smell of unwashed bodies and old rushes and wood smoke. You're never truly clean. Bathing is a rare luxury, maybe once a month, if that. You wash your face and hands daily in cold water from the mill race, but a full bath requires heating large quantities of water, which takes time and fuel you don't have. So you're always slightly grimy, always aware of the flour dust ground into your pores, the sweat dried on your skin. Your wife is cleaning your youngest son's face with a damp rag, wiping away the day's accumulation of dirt and snot. He squirms and complains. She's patient with him in a way you can't manage anymore. You've lost your patience somewhere along the way, ground down by the constant noise and work and stress. You snap at the children more than you should. You know this. You hate yourself for it. But you're so tired all the time and they're loud, and you just want silence, just for a moment, but silence never comes because the millstones are grinding downstairs. The vibration is constant. You feel it through the floor, through the walls, through your bones. The entire structure shakes subtly but continuously, and over years, this vibration causes damage. There are cracks in the plaster walls. The door frames have shifted slightly, so the doors don't close properly. One of the window shutters doesn't latch anymore because the frame has warped. You should fix these things, but when? When do you have time for home repairs when the mill demands constant attention? Your oldest daughter is helping her mother with the baby now, rocking the cradle while your wife sorts through a basket of mending. There's always mending. Clothes wear out quickly when you're doing physical labor, and new clothing is expensive. So everything gets patched and repatched until it's more patched than original fabric. Your tunic has 3 visible repairs. Your boots, which cost you dearly when you bought them 2 years ago, have been resoled twice and are starting to develop cracks that let in water. This is your domestic life. Cramped, loud, smoky, and precarious. One illness, one accident, one bad harvest season that reduces the amount of grain coming to the mill, and your family's survival is threatened. You have no savings to speak of. Any extra income goes immediately to mill maintenance or feeding extra mouths or paying off debts. You're one disaster away from catastrophe at all times. And the worst part? This is actually a relatively secure existence by medieval standards. You have a roof over your head, a roof you don't have to share with farm animals. Unlike many peasants who stable their oxen in the house for warmth, you have a steady income. You're not starving. You're not a landless laborer scraping by on seasonal work. By the standards of your society, you're doing okay. But okay still means living in 3 rooms with 6 people and a baby. Okay still means breathing flour dust every day. Okay still means working yourself into an early grave while machinery thunders beneath your bedroom. Okay is a pretty low bar in the Middle Ages. Your wife finally gets all the children settled. The 2 youngest in the main room near the fire, the older boys in their closet-sized room, your daughter in your bedroom. She's moving slowly, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. You should say something kind to her. Thank her for managing the household, for raising the children, for enduring this life. But the words don't come. You're not good at that sort of thing, and besides, what's the point? She knows. You both know. This is just how life is. I'm going back down. You tell her, rising from the table. She nods. Doesn't ask when you'll be back. Could be midnight. Could be 2 in the morning. Depends on how much grain is left to process. You descend the stairs, leaving your family behind, returning to the grinding floor where your older son is waiting. The noise envelopes you immediately, that familiar thunder. The flour dust swirls in the lamplight. The water wheel splashes outside. Everything is exactly as you left it, as it always is, as it always will be. This is your home. This is your prison. The mill surrounds you, defines you, consumes you. You work here, you sleep here, you eat here, you'll probably die here. The boundaries between workspace and living space have dissolved completely. You're never off duty, never truly at rest, never free from the noise and the dust and the constant, grinding demands. And tomorrow you'll wake up and do it all again. The millstones will turn. The wheel will splash. Your family will huddle in their smoky rooms, and you'll grind grain for people who hate you, in a building that's slowly killing you, because this is the life you were born into, and there's no escape. Welcome home. Sweet dreams. Try not to think about the cracks spreading through the walls. It's mid-morning, 3 days later, and you're doing something that should be routine but never quite is. Inspecting a fresh delivery of grain. Old Marcus from the hill farm has just dropped off 4 sacks of rye, and you're running your hands through the kernels, checking the quality. And that's when you see it. The telltale purple-black growths clinging to some of the grain heads. Your stomach sinks. Ergot. For those fortunate enough to live in an era with food safety regulations, ergot is a fungus, specifically Claviceps purpurea, that infects rye and other cereal grains. It replaces the grain kernels with dark, elongated structures called sclerotia that are packed with toxic alkaloids. These alkaloids are chemically related to LSD, and they cause a horrifying condition that medieval people called St. Anthony's fire or holy fire, though they had no idea what actually caused it. You know what it causes, though. You've seen it. 3 years ago, there was an outbreak in the next village over. People started complaining of burning sensations in their limbs, like their hands and feet were on fire. Then came the hallucinations, vivid, terrifying visions of demons and monsters. Then the convulsions. And finally, for the unlucky ones, gangrene. Their fingers and toes turned black and literally fell off as the blood supply was constricted by the ergot alkaloids. Some people died. Others survived but lost limbs to what looked like spontaneous rot. And here's the thing. It all traced back to contaminated rye flour from a local mill. The miller hadn't noticed the ergot in the grain, or maybe he did notice and ground it anyway because refusing a customer's grain is difficult when you're running a monopoly operation under feudal obligation. Either way, the ergot made it into the flour made it into bread, and the bread poisoned dozens of people. That miller didn't face legal consequences. There were no food safety laws, no health inspections, no way to prove causation in the medieval legal system, but his reputation was destroyed. People stopped bringing him grain, stopped trusting him, whispered that he was cursed or in league with dark forces. Last you heard, he'd abandoned the mill and left the region entirely. So yeah, you're taking this ergot situation seriously. Marcus, you call out. He's already walking away, eager to be done with the transaction. He turns back, irritation flickering across his weathered face. What? This rye is contaminated. I can't mill it. His expression hardens instantly. The hell you can't. That's good grain, that is. It's got ergot. Look, you hold out a handful, pointing to the dark growths. He barely glances at it. Just a little bit. Won't hurt nobody. It'll hurt plenty. I'm not grinding this. Now his face is flushing red. You have to grind it. That's the law. I bring my grain to your mill, you grind it. That's how the soak works. And here's the impossible situation you're in. He's technically right. The mill soak does obligate you to grind all grain brought to you by the Lord's tenants. Refusing is a violation of your lease terms. But grinding contaminated grain means potentially poisoning people, destroying your reputation, and possibly facing consequences if someone traces an outbreak back to your mill. I'll grind it, you say carefully, but I'm keeping it separate. You take the flour straight home, you don't mix it with clean grain, and if anyone gets sick, I'm telling them exactly where it came from. Marcus's face is pure rage now. You calling me a poisoner? You saying I'm trying to kill people? I'm saying your grain is contaminated, and I'm protecting myself. You're protecting your own backside is what you're doing. Too good to mill honest grain from honest farmers. Is that it? This is going nowhere productive. You're trapped between feudal obligation and basic human decency, and there's no good answer. If you refuse outright, Marcus complains to the reeve, and you face penalties. If you grind it and someone gets sick, you're implicated. If you grind it and set it aside and warn him, he's angry and might spread rumors about you being difficult or elitist or whatever excuse justifies his rage. You end up grinding his rye separately, marking the resulting flour clearly, and giving him a stern warning that he ignores. He takes his flour and leaves, muttering threats about reporting you for insubordination. You're left standing there, staring at your flour-dusted hands, wondering if you just participated in poisoning someone. This is the ethical nightmare of medieval milling. You're the intermediary between raw grain and food, but you have almost no power to ensure safety. You can identify problems, ergot, insect infestation, rot, mold, but you can't always refuse to process contaminated grain without violating your lease obligations or enraging customers who are already predisposed to hate you. The ergot situation is just one example of the contamination issues you face constantly. Let's talk about the others because they're equally delightful. Grain storage is a nightmare. Your customers store grain in barns, sheds, or sometimes just sacks piled in the corner of their houses. These storage areas are infested with rodents, insects, and mold. By the time the grain reaches you, it's often compromised. You see rat droppings mixed in. You see weevils, small beetles that bore into grain kernels and lay eggs. You see mold, which can produce mycotoxins that are toxic to humans. The weevils are particularly nasty. They're everywhere in medieval grain supplies, to the point where people just accepted them as inevitable. You've watched customers shake flour through a cloth sieve to remove the larger insect parts before baking bread. This is normal. This is life. Protein with your carbohydrates, courtesy of Cytophilus granarius. Sometimes the grain is damp. Wet grain is disastrous for milling. It gums up the stones, produces flour that molds quickly, and if it's wet enough, it can actually ferment. You've opened sacks that reeked of alcohol from grain that had been stored damp and started fermenting in the sack. Grinding this produces flour that's already partially spoiled. Then there's the issue of foreign objects in the grain. You've found everything. Stones, bits of wood, pieces of metal from broken farming implements, dead mice, bird feathers, human hair. Everything gets thrown into the harvest, and not all of it gets cleaned out before the grain comes to you. Your millstones are supposed to grind grain, not rocks, but rocks happen. And every time a stone hits your millstones, it damages the grinding surface, shortens the lifespan of your expensive equipment, and costs you money. You've developed a procedure for dealing with obviously contaminated grain. You spread it out on a large cloth and pick through it by hand, removing visible foreign objects. This takes time you're not being paid for, but it's better than wrecking your millstones or producing flour so contaminated that even medieval people won't eat it. But you can't catch everything. The ergot is sometimes subtle. The insect eggs are microscopic. The mold spores are invisible. So contaminated material makes it through, gets ground into flour, gets baked into bread, gets eaten by families who have no idea they're consuming poison. Medieval medical knowledge didn't make the connection between contaminated grain and illness in any systematic way. They understood that bad food could make you sick. Spoiled meat was obviously problematic, but the mechanisms of foodborne illness were mysterious. Ergotism was often interpreted as divine punishment or demonic possession because the symptoms were so bizarre. Convulsions, visions, spontaneous gangrene, clearly supernatural. Historians still argue whether medieval grain supplies were more contaminated than earlier or later periods. Some suggest that the intensification of agriculture in the High Middle Ages, with pressure to maximize yields and minimize losses, led to more contaminated grain being kept and consumed rather than discarded. Others argue that contamination was always present but better documented in the medieval period because of improved record-keeping. Either way, you're dealing with it daily. Your wife comes down the stairs, carrying a bowl. "I made some pottage for your lunch," she says, setting it on the workbench near the millstones. You look at the pottage. It's made with barley flour you ground last week, from barley that had visible mold on about a quarter of the kernels. You picked out what you could see, but who knows what made it through. Your family eats what you produce, which means you're all potentially consuming the same contaminants that worry you when customers bring bad grain. "Thanks," you say, and you eat it because you're hungry and because what choice do you have? The baby's cough is worse, your wife mentions. She's worried it might be serious. You think about the flour dust in the air, the mold spores, the general lack of cleanliness that characterizes medieval life, and you wonder if your baby is getting sick from the environment you're raising her in. Probably. But again, what choice do you have? Another customer arrives, this time with wheat that looks relatively clean. You inspect it carefully, find no obvious problems, and begin the milling process. But even clean grain isn't necessarily safe. Wheat can harbor mycotoxins you can't see. It can be cross-contaminated with ergot from a previous batch if you didn't clean the millstones thoroughly. Medieval milling is a game of minimizing risk, not eliminating it. There's a darker element to this whole situation that needs acknowledging. Some millers adulterated flour deliberately. They mixed in cheaper ingredients to stretch their supplies or increase their profit margins. Chalk dust, ground beans, sawdust, anything white and powdery could be mixed into flour to increase volume. This was illegal, and there are medieval court records of millers being fined for adulterating flour. But the practice persisted because it was profitable and difficult to detect without chemical analysis, which wouldn't be developed for centuries. You don't adulterate your flour. You're trying to run an honest operation. But you're aware that the suspicion exists that customers assume all millers are cheaters, and there's nothing you can do to prove your innocence. The lack of transparency in your operation. Customers can't watch the grinding process closely because the mill floor is dangerous and crowded, breeds suspicion. By afternoon, you've processed grain from a dozen customers, and you're mentally cataloging the problems you've seen. One batch with moderate insect infestation, one with moisture issues, one with ergot marcuses, two with excessive foreign objects, and the rest merely mediocre rather than actually good. This is normal. This is every day. You're the gatekeeper between contaminated grain and consumed flour, and your tools for ensuring safety are visual inspection, smell, and hope. The flour you produce will become bread, pottage, pastries, and porridge. It'll feed families, sustain workers, nourish children. Some of it is probably fine. Some of it is definitely contaminated with things that will make people sick in subtle, chronic ways they'll never connect to their diet. Some of it, like Marcus's ergot-infected rye, might cause acute, dramatic illness. And you're just the miller. You grind what you're given. You warn people when you can. You make decisions in the gray areas between refusal and complicity. And you lie awake at night sometimes, wondering if the flour you produce today will poison someone tomorrow, wondering if you're going to be blamed when the inevitable outbreak occurs, wondering how you ended up in a position where doing your job means potentially participating in harm. The millstones keep grinding. The contaminated grain keeps coming. And you keep processing it because the alternative, refusing to do your job, means losing everything. The flour that emerges is white, soft, and potentially deadly. But it's all anyone has. So they eat it and hope, and sometimes they get sick, and sometimes they die, and the cycle continues. Sweet dreams. Try not to think about what you're breathing, eating, or feeding your children. Ignorance, in this case, might actually be bliss. You're adjusting the millstone gap again, a routine task you've done thousands of times, when something goes catastrophically wrong. The wooden lever you're using to lift the runner stone slips. Not much, just an inch or two, but that's enough. Your hand is in the wrong position, fingers extended into the danger zone, and suddenly the stone drops. You feel an explosion of pain in your left index finger, and you yank your hand back with a scream that's swallowed by the thunder of the machinery. Blood. There's blood everywhere, pouring from your finger, which is now bent at an angle fingers shouldn't bend. You've crushed it, not severed it, but crushed it between the adjustment mechanism and the stone housing. The pain is beyond anything you've experienced. A white-hot agony that makes your vision blur and your stomach heave. Your son is there immediately, wrapping your hand in a rag that soaks through with red within seconds. Father, Father, sit down. You collapse onto a sack of grain, cradling your mangled hand, trying not to vomit from the pain. This is the reality of working in a medieval mill. The machinery is designed to crush grain with enormous force, and it will crush human flesh with equal efficiency. There are no safety guards, no emergency stops, no OSHA regulations requiring protective equipment. Just you and several tons of moving stone and wood, separated by awareness and luck, and today your luck ran out. Welcome to the occupational hazards section of this nightmare, where we discuss all the ways this job can maim or kill you. And there are many, many ways. Let's start with what just happened to you. Crush injuries. The millstones themselves, the adjustment mechanisms, the gear trains, all of these components involve massive forces acting on moving parts. If you get caught between any of them, the result is predictable. Crushed bones, torn flesh, sometimes amputation. Medieval medical records document numerous cases of millers losing fingers, hands, even entire arms to their machinery. Your crushed finger will probably never heal properly. There's no emergency room to go to, no orthopedic surgeon to set the bones correctly. Your wife will do her best. She'll splint it with small sticks and strips of cloth. She'll pray over it. Maybe she'll make a poultice of herbs that supposedly promote healing. But medieval medicine is largely ineffective for traumatic injuries. The bone will heal crooked, if it heals at all. The finger will remain partially paralyzed, painful, and probably arthritic for the rest of your life. And you'll keep working because you have no choice. There's no workers' compensation, no disability benefits, no paid medical leave. If you don't work, you don't eat. So in a few days, once the initial agony has subsided to a dull, constant throb, you'll be back on the mill floor with your mangled finger, doing your job as best you can with reduced hand function. But crush injuries are just one category of horror. Let's talk about entanglement. The power transmission system in your mill, the series of gears, shafts, and belts that transfer energy from the water wheel to the millstones, is completely exposed. There are no safety covers, no guards, nothing to prevent clothing or hair or body parts from being caught in the moving machinery. If your sleeve gets snagged by a rotating shaft, you have maybe half a second before your entire arm is pulled into the mechanism. You've heard stories. Every miller has heard stories. There was a miller 2 counties over whose beard got caught in a gear, pulled his face into the machinery before he could react, crushed his skull, killed him instantly. There was a miller's apprentice, 12 years old, whose loose tunic caught on a drive belt. He was pulled into the mechanism and, well, the details are too gruesome to dwell on, but the mill had to be shut down for 2 days to clean out the machinery. The constant noise of the mill masks warning sounds. You can't hear the creak of a board about to break, can't hear the groan of a bearing about to fail. Problems develop in silence, relative silence, and announce themselves only when they catastrophically fail. A gear tooth that's been cracking for weeks finally breaks, and suddenly a heavy wooden gear is flying apart, sending splinters the size of daggers across the mill floor. You've been hit by flying debris multiple times. There's a scar on your forearm from a piece of millstone that broke off 3 years ago. There's a dent in your skull. You can feel it if you run your fingers through your hair, from a hammer that slipped off a workbench and fell from the upper level. Head injuries are common among millers because there's so much vertical space in mill buildings, so many opportunities for tools or materials to fall from one level to another. And then there's the water wheel itself, which we touched on earlier but deserves deeper examination as a hazard. It's massive, powerful, and indifferent to human life. People fall into mill races regularly. Children playing too close to the water, workers slipping on wet stone, drunks stumbling around at night. Once you're in the water, the current pulls you toward the wheel. If you're lucky, you get swept past it or manage to grab something and pull yourself out. If you're unlucky, you get pulled into the wheel mechanism itself. The wheel buckets can trap a human body. The drive shaft can catch clothing and pull you under. The water flow can hold you submerged until you drown. There are historical accounts of mill wheels having to be stopped and partially disassembled to recover bodies, or what remained of bodies, after accidents. Your 13-year-old son works in this environment. Your 15-year-old son works in this environment. They're learning the trade, which means they're learning to work around deadly machinery with zero safety equipment. Boys lose fingers learning to mill. Boys lose lives learning to mill. This is accepted. This is normal. Child labor in medieval Europe isn't controversial. It's economically necessary. Children work because families need the income and because that's how skills are transmitted across generations. You look at your mangled finger, wrapped in a blood-soaked rag, and you think about your sons working here, and you feel a combination of fear and resignation. This is their future. This is their inheritance. The mill, the hazards, the constant risk of injury or death. But wait, we're not done with the injury catalog. Let's talk about falls. Mill buildings are multi-story structures with steep stairs, open trapdoors for hauling grain between floors, and lofts for storage. The stairs are narrow, uneven, and poorly lit. There are no handrails because handrails cost money and aren't required by any regulation. The trapdoors remain open during operation, so you can drop sacks of grain from upper floors to lower floors without carrying them down the stairs. These open holes are accidents waiting to happen. People fall through trapdoors constantly. You step backward while carrying a heavy sack, misjudge your position, and suddenly you're falling 10 feet onto a stone floor. Broken bones are the best-case scenario. Broken necks happen too. There's a cemetery in the village where at least 3 millers are buried who died from falls inside their own mills. The loft areas where grain is stored have low ceilings and exposed beams. You're constantly hitting your head, ducking under beams, navigating in semi-darkness because opening too many windows lets in birds and rain. Concussions are routine. Nobody calls them concussions. They're just knocks to the head. But that's what they are. Repeated traumatic brain injuries that accumulate over a lifetime of working in cramped, poorly lit spaces. And then there are the fires. Oh, the fires. Remember that flour dust we discussed earlier? The explosive flour dust? Well, even if it doesn't explode, it's highly flammable. You use oil lamps and candles for light inside the mill. Open flames in an environment saturated with combustible dust. The risk is obvious. Mills burn down regularly. There are medieval insurance records. Yes, they had insurance sort of documenting mill fires. Sometimes they start from candles tipping over. Sometimes from sparks generated by the millstones when they accidentally grind a piece of metal. Sometimes from lightning strikes because medieval buildings don't have lightning rods. Sometimes from arson because remember, people hate you, and a handful of villagers might decide your mill burning down would be a net positive for the community. If the mill catches fire, you have minutes to get your family out before the structure becomes an inferno. The wooden construction, the accumulated flour dust, the stored grain, it all burns fast and hot. You've had nightmares about this. You wake up sometimes, convinced you smell smoke, your heart racing until you confirm it's just the usual wood smoke smell from the fireplace. Your lease probably makes you responsible for rebuilding after a fire. Not the Lord, he owns the land and the water rights, but the physical structure is your problem. If the mill burns, you're financially ruined. You'll spend years in debt, trying to pay for reconstruction while also surviving without income from milling operations. So you're paranoid about fire prevention. You check the lamps constantly, make sure they're stable and positioned away from draft currents that might blow dust into the flame. You enforce strict rules. No one brings fire into the grain storage area. No smoking anywhere near the mill. No one tends the fireplace in the living quarters without someone supervising. It's exhausting, this constant vigilance, but it's necessary. And despite all your precautions, you know that if a fire starts, there's a good chance you won't be able to stop it. Medieval firefighting consists of bucket brigades and prayer. By the time you organize the villagers to bring water, the mill will be fully involved. You'll watch your livelihood, your home, your entire life burn to the ground, and there won't be anything you can do except hope your family made it out. Your finger throbs, pulling you back to the present moment. The rag is completely soaked with blood now. Your wife has appeared. Someone must have told her you were injured, and she's examining the damage with a grim expression. "You need to stop the bleeding," she says, which is obvious but still needs saying. "It'll stop," you mutter, though you're not entirely sure. Crushed fingers can bleed quite a lot. She disappears and returns with a tourniquet, a strip of cloth that she ties tightly around your wrist. The pressure is agonizing, but it does slow the bleeding. Then she unwraps the original rag to look at the damage, and even you wince. The finger is pulped, the skin torn, the bone clearly broken in multiple places. "Can you move it?" she asks. You try. The pain is transcendent, but yes, you can bend it slightly. So it's not completely destroyed, just mostly destroyed. "You'll need to keep it splinted," she says, "and pray it doesn't go bad." By go bad, she means infection, gangrene, blood poisoning, the kinds of complications that kill people in the medieval era because there are no antibiotics, no antiseptics, just folk remedies that sometimes work and often don't. If your finger gets infected, you might lose the finger. If the infection spreads, you might lose the hand. If it spreads further, you die. So yeah, crushing your finger isn't just a painful inconvenience. It's potentially life-threatening. Historians still argue whether medieval workers developed any kind of systematic safety practices. Some evidence suggests that experienced workers were careful, that they developed routines and habits that minimized risk. Other evidence suggests that the constant pressure to produce, combined with fatigue and the absence of safety regulations, meant that accidents were inevitable and frequent. Looking at the coroner's records, it seems like the second interpretation is more accurate. People died a lot, but you don't die today. Today, you just lose functional use of a finger, add another injury to your collection of scars and chronic pain points, and get back to work because the millstones are grinding and grain doesn't process itself. Your son takes over the adjustment task you were attempting. He's more careful now, shaken by watching you get hurt. But he'll eventually get comfortable with the machinery again, confident in his abilities, and then he'll have his own accident. This is the cycle. This is how it works. The mill grinds on. The machinery turns. And you sit there, cradling your mangled hand, wondering how many more injuries you can sustain before something kills you, and knowing that the answer is irrelevant because you'll keep working here regardless. Welcome to the world of medieval workplace safety. There isn't any. 3 weeks have passed since you crushed your finger. It's healing, sort of. The splint came off yesterday, and you can move it again, though it's permanently crooked and aches in cold weather. But today brings a different kind of crisis, one you've been dreading since late summer. You wake up, and there's no sound. The millstones aren't grinding. The water wheel isn't splashing. Everything is silent. You bolt upright, heart hammering, and rush to the window. The mill race is frozen solid, a white ribbon of ice stretching from the upstream sluice all the way past the water wheel. The wheel itself is locked in place, ice coating the buckets, icicles hanging from the paddles like frozen teeth. Winter has arrived, and with it, the seasonal nightmare that every water-powered miller dreads. Your machinery has been rendered completely useless by weather. This is the brutal reality of depending on natural water flow for power. Rivers freeze, rivers flood, rivers dry up, and when they do, your income stops. Let's start with winter, since that's what you're dealing with right now. The freeze happened overnight. Temperatures plummeted, and the shallow water in the mill race froze before you could do anything about it. Now the wheel is locked, immovable, and you have no power source. The grain sacks are piling up inside, customers are arriving with more, and you can't process any of it. You throw on your heaviest cloak, a wool garment that's seen better days, and trudge outside. The air is bitterly cold, the kind of cold that makes your lungs hurt when you breathe. The mill race is definitely frozen solid. You walk out onto it cautiously, testing the ice. It's thick, maybe 3 inches, strong enough to support your weight. This is going to require serious effort. You need to break up the ice in the race, free the water wheel, and restore water flow. And you need to do it quickly, because every day the mill sits idle is a day of lost income. You grab an iron bar from the tool shed, a heavy prying tool, and begin attacking the ice. Chips fly with each blow. Your breath comes in white clouds. Your injured finger screams in protest as you grip the bar. This is brutal physical labor, the kind that leaves you exhausted and sweating despite the freezing temperature. Your sons join you, and together you work for hours, breaking ice, clearing chunks from the race, trying to restore flow. It's like trying to excavate a frozen river by hand, which is essentially what you're doing. The ice keeps reforming at the edges even as you clear the center. The water upstream is still flowing, barely, but as soon as it enters your cleared section, it starts to freeze again. By midday, you've managed to clear enough ice that the wheel can turn, barely. The flow is weak, the wheel moves sluggishly, and the grinding capacity is maybe a quarter of normal. But it's something. You rush inside to engage the millstones, and they begin their grinding, slower than usual but functioning. This is your winter reality. Constant ice management, checking the race multiple times per day, breaking up new ice formations, trying to keep water flowing in sub-freezing temperatures. It's exhausting, it's cold, and it's necessary if you want to keep earning any income at all. Some winters are worse than others. You remember the winter of 1310? Or was it 1311? Time blurs. When the river froze so completely that even your ice-breaking efforts couldn't restore flow. The mill sat idle for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of no income. 6 weeks of watching your grain stores dwindle as you fed your family. 6 weeks of customers taking their grain to the next village's mill, which had a stronger water source that didn't freeze as completely. You almost starved that winter. Your family ate thin pottage twice a day, stretching your supplies as far as they would go. Your youngest daughter, not the current youngest, the one before who died of fever 2 years later, developed a cough that never quite went away. Malnutrition weakens children, makes them vulnerable to every disease that comes through the village. But winter isn't the only seasonal threat. Let's talk about drought. Summer droughts are perhaps even more devastating because they can last for months. The river level drops steadily as rainfall decreases. First, the flow becomes shallow, the water wheel still turns, but with less power. You adjust by opening the sluice gate wider, trying to channel every available drop of water to your wheel. The grinding slows, your capacity decreases. You can't process as much grain per day, which means customers have to wait longer, which means they complain more. As the drought continues, the river keeps dropping. Eventually, the water level falls below the intake of your mill race. The race goes dry, the wheel stops, and you're completely shut down, not because of ice this time, but because there's simply no water. During the drought of 1315, part of the Great Famine period, when Europe experienced years of crop failures and starvation, your mill sat idle for 3 months. 3 months of no work, no income, nothing. You tried to find other work. Day labor, hauling goods, anything. But everyone was desperate, and jobs were scarce. Your family survived on whatever you could scavenge or trade. You sold some of your possessions, a good knife, a spare cloak, some cooking pots. Your wife foraged for edible plants, mushrooms, anything to supplement the meager supplies. You watched your children grow thin, their faces becoming gaunt, their energy fading, and you watched the empty mill race, praying for rain, checking the sky constantly for clouds. When rain finally came, you wept with relief. The river rose, water flowed back into the race, and the wheel turned again. You worked 18-hour days for weeks, trying to process the backlog of grain and recover some income. Historians still argue whether climate fluctuations in the medieval period, particularly the wetter, cooler conditions of the early 14th century, caused increased mill operational problems. The documentary evidence is mixed. Some regions experienced more droughts, others more floods. But for individual millers, the experience was clear. Weather could destroy your livelihood without warning. And then there are the floods. Oh, the floods. Spring floods are predictable but still dangerous. Snowmelt combined with spring rains causes rivers to swell dramatically. The water level in the mill race rises, the wheel spins faster, much faster, and suddenly you're dealing with too much power rather than too little. Too much power is just as problematic as too little. The millstones spin dangerously fast, overheating the grain and producing burnt-tasting flour. The gears are stressed beyond their design limits, cracking and failing. The wheel itself can be damaged by the excessive force of water slamming into the buckets. You have to partially close the sluice gate during floods, reducing water flow to bring the wheel speed back under control. But closing the gate too much means wasting potential income. You could be grinding more grain if only you could safely harness all that water power. It's a constant balancing act, adjusting the gate position hourly as flood conditions change. The real danger comes when floods exceed your control systems. If the water level rises above the sluice gate, if the race overflows, if the entire mill yard becomes inundated, you're in serious trouble. Water rushes through the mill building, flooding the lower floor where the millstones are housed. Grain sacks get soaked and ruined. Machinery gets submerged. The wooden components of your mill, the gears, the shafts, the structural timbers, absorb water and begin to rot. You've experienced this twice. Both times required weeks of recovery work. Drying out the building, replacing damaged gears, cleaning mud and debris from every surface, treating wood with pitch to slow the rot. Both times cost you more than a month's income in repairs and lost productivity. And in extreme floods, the catastrophic ones that happen maybe once a generation, mills get destroyed entirely, washed away, collapsed, reduced to scattered timbers floating downriver. You've heard accounts of such disasters. Millers watching helplessly as their entire livelihood is obliterated by surging water. Nothing left but a ruined foundation and a tangle of broken wood. Your mill sits close enough to the river that catastrophic flooding is a real risk. You've staked your family's survival on the assumption that such a flood won't happen during your tenure. It's a gamble. Every spring, when the water rises, you hold your breath and hope. Beyond seasonal variations, there are longer-term changes in river behavior that affect mills. Rivers shift their courses gradually over decades. A mill that was perfectly positioned when it was built might find itself stranded as the river migrates away, leaving the mill race dry. This happened to a mill you knew of. The river carved a new channel during a particularly severe flood, abandoning the old course, and the miller was left with a useless structure and a worthless lease. River management in the medieval period was primitive. There were no dams, no systematic flow control, no engineered channels. You worked with natural conditions, adapting as best you could. If the river level dropped permanently due to changes upstream, maybe a landslide altered the watercourse, maybe a drought lasted so long it changed the groundwater level, you were out of luck. Some mills tried to improve their water supply by digging longer mill races to tap into the river farther upstream where the flow was stronger. This required permission from the Lord, significant investment in digging and construction, and careful engineering to maintain the right gradient for water flow. Many such projects failed. Water would leak from the race, or the gradient would be wrong, or the upstream landowner would object to having his water diverted. You're currently standing outside again, checking the mill race in early afternoon. The ice is starting to reform at the edges. You'll need to break it again before nightfall. This is your life now, at least until spring. Mill operator and icebreaker, fighting a constant battle against winter to keep water flowing. Your customers don't care about your weather problems. They bring grain, they expect it to be ground, and delays are met with complaints and accusations. The mill in Ashford is still running, someone will say, referring to a mill with a better water source. Maybe I should take my grain there instead. The threat is empty, the soak system binds them to your mill, but it still stings. You're doing everything humanly possible to keep operating, and it's not enough. It's never enough. Inside, your wife is dealing with her own weather-related crisis. The living quarters are freezing. The fireplace struggles to heat the cramped rooms, and the constant vibration from the mill has created gaps in the walls that let in drafts. She's stuffed rags into the worst cracks, hung blankets over the windows, done everything she can to keep the cold out. But medieval insulation is essentially non-existent, and your family shivers through the winter nights. The baby, the one with the cough, is worse in winter. The cold air aggravates her breathing. She coughs constantly, a wet, rattling sound that terrifies your wife. Respiratory illnesses kill medieval children with frightening frequency, especially in winter. You've already lost 3 children to fevers and coughs. Every winter, you wonder if you'll lose another. But spring will come eventually. The ice will melt, the river will flow freely again, and you'll have a brief window of good operating conditions before summer drought or spring flooding creates new problems. This is the cycle. This is the rhythm of your existence. Fighting the weather, adapting to conditions you can't control, hoping that this year won't be the year everything falls apart. You head back inside, your hands numb with cold despite your gloves. The millstones are grinding slowly, processing what little grain you can manage with reduced water flow. It's not enough. It's never enough. But it's all you have. The river gives and the river takes away. Today it's taking. Tomorrow, who knows? You'll wake up, check the race, break more ice, and hope that someday, maybe the water will be kind to you. But probably not. The river doesn't care. The weather doesn't care. Nature is indifferent to your survival, and you're just a human trying to harness forces far beyond your control, one frozen bucket at a time. It's evening, and you're sitting alone on the bank of the mill race, watching the water wheel turn in the fading light. Your children are asleep upstairs. Your wife is mending clothes by lamplight. The mill is running smoothly for once. No jams, no broken gears, no ice to break. This should be a peaceful moment, but you feel profoundly, crushingly alone. You've lived in this village for 37 years. You've milled grain for nearly every family within 5 miles. You've watched children grow up, seen couples marry, attended funerals of people you've known your entire life. And yet, if you died tomorrow, you're not sure anyone would genuinely mourn you. They'd mourn the inconvenience of losing their miller, certainly. They'd worry about who would take over the mill. But you, as a person, you're not convinced anyone would care. This is the hidden cost of your profession, the one that doesn't show up in injury reports or economic records. The profound social isolation that comes from being the enforcer of an unpopular monopoly. You're not quite a pariah, but you're not quite part of the community either. You exist in a strange liminal space, necessary but unwelcome, essential but distrusted. Let's talk about why nobody wants to be your friend, because it's a fascinating window into medieval social dynamics and the psychology of economic resentment. First, there's the monopoly issue we've discussed. People fundamentally resent being forced to use your services. Even if you're honest, even if you charge fair rates, even if you do excellent work, the fact that they have no choice breeds resentment. Choice matters to people, it always has, and the mill soak removes choice entirely. You're not their miller because they selected you. You're their miller because feudal law mandates it. This creates a baseline hostility that colors every interaction. When Walter brings his grain, he's not a customer engaging in voluntary commerce. He's a subject complying with mandatory extraction. The psychological framing is completely different. He can't take his business elsewhere, can't negotiate your rates, can't opt out. So he resents you even if rationally he understands that you're just operating within the system. Second, there's the suspicion of cheating. We've touched on this, but it goes deeper than simple mistrust. In medieval culture, millers occupy a specific role in the social imagination. They're tricksters, cheaters, figures of moral ambiguity. Medieval literature is full of dishonest millers. Chaucer's Canterbury Tales features a miller who's explicitly described as a thief. Church sermons use millers as examples of sinful greed. The stereotype is so pervasive that even honest millers, and you try to be honest, can't escape it. This stereotype didn't emerge from nowhere. Some millers were dishonest. The combination of a monopoly, complex processes that customers couldn't directly observe, and financial desperation created opportunities and incentives for fraud. Customers knew this, so they approached every transaction with suspicion. And that suspicion, even when unwarranted, poisoned relationships. You've tried to build trust. You've invited customers to watch the milling process, explained your procedures, demonstrated that you're not stealing their grain. But suspicion persists because it's cultural, not individual. People believe millers are cheats the way they believe the sun will rise. It's just an accepted fact about the world. Third, there's the wealth differential. You're not wealthy, but you're more economically secure than many of your customers. You have a steady income while they face crop failures and harvest uncertainties. Your children don't go hungry as often as theirs do. This creates resentment, especially during hard times. During the famine years, when people were literally starving, you still had flour. Not as much as usual, the drought affected your operations, but your family didn't starve. People noticed, they remembered, and when the crisis passed, they still looked at you differently, as someone who profited while they suffered. The reality is more complicated, of course. You suffered too. Your income dropped dramatically during the drought. You sold possessions, went into debt, struggled to survive. But perception matters more than reality, and the perception is that you did better than most. You're seen as part of the exploitative apparatus, alongside the reeve, the bailiff, the lord's tax collectors, that extracts wealth from peasants. Fourth, there's the physical separation. You don't live in the village proper. The mill is positioned outside the main settlement, close to the river, separated from community life by both geography and the noise of your operation. You don't participate in village activities the way other people do. You're not at the tavern in the evenings because you're working. You're not in the fields during harvest because you're grinding the harvest. You're not at market on Sundays because Sunday is your only day to catch up on mill maintenance. This physical and social separation reinforces your outsider status. You're not part of the organic community networks, the informal reciprocity, the shared labor, the communal celebrations. You exist adjacent to the community, serving it but not joining it. Fifth, and this is perhaps the most insidious factor, there's genuine fear. Not fear of you personally, but fear of what you represent. The Lord's power made manifest. When people look at you, they see the feudal system in human form. You're the daily reminder that they don't control their own economic lives, that authority reaches into their most basic activities, that autonomy is an illusion. This fear manifests as hostility because fear often does. They can't safely express anger at the Lord. That could result in severe punishment. But they can mutter about the miller, complain about fees, cast suspicious glances. You're a safe target for frustrations that actually originate higher up the social hierarchy. So what does this isolation feel like day to day? It feels like being watched constantly but never truly seen. People observe your actions, scrutinize your measurements, monitor your prosperity, but nobody asks how you're doing. Nobody cares about your crushed finger, your flour-damaged lungs, your sleep deprivation. You're a function, not a person. It feels like being excluded from casual social interaction. At church, the one place you regularly interact with villagers, people are polite but distant. They don't invite you to share their bench. They don't chat after services. They fulfill their religious obligations near you, not with you. It feels like watching your children struggle with the stigma. Your oldest son is 15, and you've noticed that village girls don't seem interested in him. He's decent-looking, hard-working, will inherit a valuable mill lease, but he's the miller's son, and that matters. The social taint is hereditary. Your daughter will face similar challenges when it's time to arrange a marriage. Miller families tend to marry other Miller families because nobody else wants them. It feels like having no one to talk to about the stress. Other professions have peer communities. Farmers work together, share knowledge, commiserate about common problems. Craftsmen have guilds. Even beggars have their own social networks. But you, the nearest miller is 5 miles away. You see him maybe twice a year. Your only regular social interactions are transactional, tinged with suspicion, never truly friendly. Historians still argue whether medieval social structures created more or less loneliness than modern life. Some suggest that tight-knit village communities provided strong social bonds, that medieval people were less isolated than contemporary individuals. Others point to examples like yours, people whose economic roles placed them outside community acceptance, and suggest that medieval social hierarchies could be brutally isolating. The truth is probably somewhere in between, but from your perspective, sitting alone on this riverbank, the isolation is crushing. You think about the accusations that have been leveled at you over the years. Someone started a rumor that you were a witch, that you cursed people's flour to make them sick. The rumor didn't gain serious traction. Accusations of witchcraft could be deadly, but it circulated for months, and people looked at you differently. Every stomachache, every digestive complaint in the village became potential evidence of your malevolence. Another time, someone accused you of deliberately damaging grain so you could keep more as compensation for extra work reprocessing it. This accusation actually went to manor court. You had to defend yourself before the Lord Steward, prove that the damaged grain arrived damaged. You were exonerated, but the accusation itself did lasting damage to your reputation. The constant suspicion wears you down. You find yourself becoming defensive, prickly, quick to take offense. This doesn't help your social standing. People see you as unfriendly, which reinforces their dislike, but you can't seem to stop. Every interaction feels like a potential accusation, every customer a potential enemy. Your wife experiences her own version of this isolation. Village women are supposed to support each other, share child-rearing advice, help during births and illnesses. But the other women keep your wife at arm's length. They're polite, but they don't include her in their informal networks. When she gave birth to your youngest, only the midwife attended, no neighbors bringing food, no communal support. Just the midwife doing her paid job, leaving as soon as the baby was delivered. Your children have learned to be cautious around other children. They've been called names, miller's brat, flower thief, and they've learned not to expect friendship. Your oldest son has become sullen and withdrawn. Your daughter is quiet, watchful, always assessing whether she's welcome before speaking. They're developing the same defensive wariness that characterizes your own personality. This is the legacy you're passing down. Not just a mill lease and a trade, but a social position that guarantees isolation, suspicion, and loneliness. There are moments when you wonder if you could do something different. Maybe move to a city where millers are just one craft among many and social stigma is less intense. Maybe learn a different trade, escape the miller's reputation. But these are fantasies. You're locked into this life by economics, by family obligations, by the realities of medieval social mobility, which is essentially non-existent for people of your class. The water wheel continues its steady rotation, water splashing rhythmically. The sound is almost soothing when you're not thinking about the mechanical dangers or the economic pressures or the social isolation. Almost, you hear footsteps behind you. Your wife has come out, wrapped in a shawl against the evening chill. "You should come in," she says. "It's getting cold." "Soon," you reply. She hesitates, then sits beside you. You're grateful for her presence, for this one person who's chosen to share your isolated existence. She married you knowing what it meant, knowing the social costs, and she's endured it alongside you. That's something. Maybe it's enough. "Do you ever regret it?" you ask. "Marrying a miller?" She's quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes," she admits, "but I also don't know what else we could have done. This is the life we have." It's not a ringing endorsement, but it's honest. And honesty is rare enough that you appreciate it. The two of you sit together in the gathering darkness, watching the mill operate, listening to the familiar sounds of your livelihood. Alone together in a world that needs you but doesn't want you. Tomorrow, customers will come with their grain and their suspicions. Children will whisper behind your back. The reeve might conduct another inspection, looking for violations to report. The cycle will continue, grinding on like the millstones, wearing you down one interaction at a time. But tonight, you have this. A moment of quiet, a partner beside you, and the river flowing endlessly past, indifferent to human loneliness, just as it's indifferent to everything else. The mill grinds on, the wheel turns, and you remain the necessary outsider, the essential stranger, the person everyone needs and nobody wants. It's a strange fate, being simultaneously vital and unwelcome, but it's yours now, and you've learned to carry it. You stand, extend a hand to help your wife up, and together you walk back into the mill, back into the noise and dust and isolation that define your existence. The door closes behind you, shutting out the night, sealing you inside your fortress of loneliness. And in the morning, you'll wake and do it all again, because what else is there? The millstones need you. The customers need you, even as they resent you. Your family needs you. So you keep grinding, keep working, keep existing in your isolated bubble, necessary but alone, essential but unwanted, needed but unloved. Welcome to the life of a medieval miller, where survival is guaranteed, but belonging never is. And now, as the stars emerge overhead and the water wheel continues its eternal rotation, let the rhythm of the mill begin to slow in your mind. The splashing grows softer, more distant. The grinding fades to a gentle rumble, then to a whisper. You're drifting now, away from the harsh medieval world, away from the dust and danger and isolation, back toward the comfort of your own bed, your own time, your own peaceful darkness. The miller's life was hard, harder than most of us can truly imagine. But you're not a medieval miller. You're safe, comfortable, free from feudal obligations and occupational hazards. Your lungs are clear. Your fingers are intact. Nobody suspects you of witchcraft or theft. You're simply here, listening to the story, letting it carry you gently into sleep. The mill fades into history. The water wheel stops turning. The endless noise finally, mercifully, falls silent, and you're left with nothing but the soft darkness of rest, the quiet comfort of modern life, and the deep, peaceful sleep you've earned. The miller's watch is over. Your watch is over. Let everything go. Let the darkness take you. Let sleep embrace you completely. Sweet dreams, friend. You've survived a day in the medieval mill, and now you can rest, knowing you never have to go back.